A few people coming in this morning because of the traffic problems in the city. The bridge I-71-75 South is now closed, and the traffic is backed up I-75 all the way to Norwood Lateral. So it's those trying to get down I-75 this morning to join us are going to be a little bit late. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for being on the phone on Friday for our organizational phone call. I'm Bob McDonald, and I'm the chair of the task force, retired chairman and CEO of Procter & Gamble Company. I thought we would start this morning. We've got a pretty packed agenda, but I thought we would start this morning again with a few remarks from our sponsors, the people who are funding and backing our effort. That's Kathy Merchant and Tim Maloney of the Greater Cincinnati Foundation and the Hale U.S. Bank Foundation. So Kathy, if I may impose upon you, either there or here, wherever you like, there's a microphone there. Please come on up here.
This is like an enterprise. Bob keeps the trains running on time, just so you know. This is a perfect metaphor for us here. Good morning, I'm Kathy Merchant with the Greater Cincinnati Foundation.
And I'm Tim Maloney with the Hale Foundation at U.S. Bank.
We're twins separated at birth for this project. It's our pleasure, for historic reasons, frankly, at the Greater Cincinnati Foundation to be a co-convener of this project. The Greater Cincinnati Foundation turned 50 last year, and well, I wish I could cite that number for myself. It feels young. We've actually been investors in the arts for that entire time. Our community's arts and cultural assets are very important to us. And for the past dozen years, we have, with perhaps greater intentionality, tried to help in various iterations be part of the team to figure out how we preserve our cultural assets, the physical part of them, and grow them for the future. So we're excited to be part of this, and especially thrilled because this is a rather unusual, if not unprecedented, collaboration, and we stand for that as well. So we're excited to be here today. Before I turn it over to Tim, I want to introduce some members of my team. Amy Cheney, who is our Vice President of Giving Strategies, Beth Benson, who's our Vice President of Communications and Marketing, and I don't know if Shiloh Turner is here. She's probably stuck in traffic, but you'll meet her later. Thanks.
I could only add to what Kathy's already said that we've been having this conversation for nearly a decade. Many of you have been at that table when we've struggled with this, and Bob's kind of taken us out of the fog and given us a very clear path. We're grateful for your participation and look forward to a very successful outcome. Thank you.
As we talked on the phone, even though the picture on the screen here is of the Museum Center, we are also going to be involved in taking a look at Music Hall. Music Hall is in the purview of 3CDC, and Steve Lieber and his team have been working on Music Hall. But as we do our work on the Museum Center, we will bring the discussion of Music Hall into the room as well, because we want to go forward to the county commissioners and to the public as appropriate including to aggregate both important projects. I also would say that the purpose of this task force is to come up with what we think the best solution is. There are no preconceived notions, no prejudices. We really want your best ideas, and we're very fortunate to have in the room some outstanding talent that knows this city, that knows how to build buildings, and we're looking for your best ideas, whether it is to refurbish this building, or alternatively, whether it is to move the museums somewhere else in some other building. We wanted the best solution, and that's what I've committed to the county commissioners. I'm going to be having to leave this afternoon for an hour or so, 2 hours, to meet with 2 county commissioners. By the end of today, we will have met with all 3 county commissioners and briefed them on the project. As I said on the phone, so far we've gotten a very enthusiastic support and warm welcome from Chris Monzel, the chair no commitment to support for whatever we come up with, but nevertheless, glad that we're doing it. And I'm sure we'll get the same from Todd and Greg this afternoon, but it's important that we touch base with them. I was now going to introduce the task force members. Do we know what's going on with the slide? They're trying to fix it? Okay. Well, I was going to put the names up rather than call everyone out by name, but let me describe first of all how we're organized. We have the task force itself, which are the members of the task force, community leaders from all over Cincinnati, all walks of life, all different vocations, that will be helping to put together the proposal. Supporting that task force is a team of independent engineers and architects led by Scott Rowland of Langen Consulting. Scott, if you could just stand for a minute. And Scott, and you'll introduce your team later. This group of independent consultants will work for the task force. They're independent, they're qualified obviously as architects, as engineers and so forth. They'll work for the task force to help develop this objective proposal that we will then take to the community. Supporting the Museum Center, of course, is Doug McDonald, the CEO of the Museum Center, and I'm sorry. Doug will be supported by a design team which he has had working on a master plan for the Museum Center, and he will describe that later. That's another group of architects, engineers, and so forth, and they work for the Museum Center. So the task force has an independent group, the Museum Center has an independent group. Maintaining that independence is important because we want to make sure that whatever proposal we come up with is independent and has the objectivity of the task force, not necessarily influenced by the advocacy of either the Music Hall organization or the Music Hall organization or the Museum Center organization. I think with that, Scott, I'll have you come up because we have to reboot the computer. This is a slide that shows the members of the task force. So you can see it's quite an extensive group. Many of the members are going to be in and out of the various meetings, and Scott and I have committed that we will update people who are not here, and each person is taking responsibility to check with us after each meeting. You want to go ahead with your team, Scott?
I just want to start off by saying I'm honored to be a part of this group and to work through this process with all of you over the next couple of weeks. Just to go through my team, we've put together a team of Langen Engineering, GBBN, THP Limited, and HEP Engineering. GBBN is going to be led by Steve Kennett. One of the reasons that we reached out to GBBN and THP and HEP is because they're very involved with what's going on with the music hall and going through a similar process right now with 3CDC. So we thought it would be a perfect fit for this particular project to have them come over here and create an open collaboration between the two buildings. Now we're going to introduce the design team. I'm going to have Doug McDonald come up and go through the design team just to kind of summarize their experience.
Welcome to Museum Center. I'm glad that you're all here today and appreciate the time that all of you are spending in this program to look at these issues. Museum Center really started the process of looking at who could help us look at the unique aspects of Union Terminal and try and find what we thought was a good solution. We looked out to find people who were kind of experts in the field, who had done projects which were similar in scale and similar in terms of historic importance as Union Terminal. And in doing that, so we had a local architecture firm that has worked with this project for since the very beginning, when it was converted from a train station into Museum Center, and that was Glazier Works. And Art Huck was a young architect at the time he started that, and some days he still thinks he's young, right? So that was the local firm that was involved in it. We drew on the experience of a national person who has done lots of historic renovations and historic preservation projects of national importance, and that's George Scarmaeus, and George is right over here. George has done many notable projects. Some of you would know, like U.S. Supreme Court is one of the projects George has done, Virginia State Capitol Complex, and also small, really unique properties like the Lincoln's Cottage in Washington, D.C. So he specializes, his exclusive practice is in historic preservation. He was with a firm that he's a partner in, Historic Preservation Partners in Philadelphia. We have two groups here that are working on the mechanical systems, and you'll see today mechanical systems are a major part of this whole project. And Landmark Facilities Group has been a part of that process. Paul and Tom are over here. And also, they've done a lot of museum projects. They've also done historic building projects. And then Eric, which is in gray right here, they're an international engineering firm with a lot of expertise. They've done lots of museum projects, historic projects around the world. We also have, for structural issues, we have Silman Associates and Nancy is right over here. So Nancy's with Silman, and so they have been the ones that worked with us on the structural issues. Obviously, you'll see there's a lot of steel in this building. Did I catch everybody, George?
And Mike Funk.
Pardon? Oh, and Mike Funk. Mike's right here. Mike is a cost estimator. Obviously, a lot of discussion on costs, so that's been Mike's focus to help us work with it.
Here's some other individuals that are involved with this process. CR Architecture and Design. Zach wasn't able to be with us this week, but he performed the third-party review for the county for approval for the levy in 2011. He has said he's going to make himself available for this process via phone this week, and if we want to meet with him directly next week, we can do that too. There's some other individuals the Cincinnati Museum Center involved that are listed here. BGAV Destinations is going to be involved, as is HGC. HGC is the contractor that worked on the first Project 1 that you'll be hearing about later today. Landor Associates, and also other members of Procter & Gamble. So now I'm going to run through the agenda over the next couple of weeks. This process has already started internally, where we've started reviewing the project, existing documents, going through, speaking with various team members to understand everything that's gone on to date. Yesterday, the design team, the Cincinnati Museum Center, and the evaluation team all met here to kind of review the project and review what we're going to be going through over the next couple of weeks. Today, as you know, we're sitting here with the opening remarks. Then we're going to go on a tour of the building. This tour lasts until noon. It's a pretty extensive tour. You're going to see a lot of the elements of the building that you might have not seen in the past. Then we're going to have a working lunch, and followed by design team presentations. There's going to be presentations in the afternoon that kind of just set a baseline of what's been done to date on this particular project. Then HGC is going to come in, and they're going to give a presentation on Project 1 and go through kind of what they've discovered on Project 1 that could help put in perspective of what we could possibly discover on this full renovation project, if that's the path that we decide to choose. This, as I mentioned before, Zach's not going to be able to be present with us, so starting at 4 o'clock, then it's going to be really an open conversation where we're going to speak with the task force and answer any questions and address any comments that you have. Finally, tonight at 6 o'clock, there's going to be a dinner at the historic dining rooms. All the task force, as well as the design team and evaluation teams, are invited to that. I hope you could attend. On the second day, this is really kind of going to be a criteria analysis where we're going to really drive into Messer and Turner's cost estimates that they're going to be preparing. So there's the conceptual master plan that we're going to be looking at, and also the third-party review that was done in 2011. But we're also going to add additional assumptions and things that Messer and Turner should be including in their cost estimate that they're putting together for us to review. Then over the 13th through the 19th, Turner and Messer are going to go back and put together their cost estimates. We're going to be analyzing this information. And then the following week, on Monday, Messer and Turner are going to come back and they're going to give presentations on what their cost estimates, the cost estimates they came up with. Just a side note, all of these days, anyone from the task force is more than welcome to join and participate in any of these days and meetings that I'm going through right now. Then following the cost estimate presentations, our valuation team is going to go back and we're going to take a look and speak with the CMs and design team and museum center and task force throughout the week to kind of brainstorm some ideas and possible adjustments to the cost estimate that need to be made. That's going to go on through the week. And then at the end of the week, we're going to come back and have another presentation of any adjustments that need to be made that Turner and Messer need to take into consideration, where they go back and do a reconciliation of their cost estimate. On the last day after the presentation, there's also going to be a presentation by 3CDC of the music hall and the work that they've done that's very similar and aligned to what we're trying to do here. And that will be and then Turner and Messer will go back and they'll revise their cost estimate and get it to the task force and the rest of the group by the 31st, the 30th of January. That's it. Are there any questions or comments?
Any questions or comments? Anything we talked about so far?
I have a sign-in sheet that's going to be handed around. If you could just sign your name. I've tried to list off everyone that's going to be attending, but if your name's not on here, there's space in the back just to write it in.
If you're like me and you're somewhat new to this industry, there's a lot of acronyms. You're probably wondering what CM means, some of these other things that are in the agenda. CM is construction management. But those who are in this industry all the time and who use these acronyms, if you could kind of just use the English words for the task force, that would be helpful. We thought that before we started the tour, it would be helpful to have some background on the master plan and also on the Project 1, which was the project that was actually completed as kind of a lead market for the restoration of the building. And we thought George would do that, correct? George, if you would, please.
Thank you. When I first came to this building in 2005, to start the master plan. I had no idea what I was going to be up against. And you will see today, during our walkthrough and in this brief presentation, something totally remarkable. Quite often when we are in a city and we live around a building such as this one, we don't pay too much attention to it. I was born and raised in a city about 4,000 miles away from here, and we have this little building up at the top of the hill. It's called the Acropolis. It's in Athens. And most of us don't pay too much attention to it because it's there every day. And I think most of you feel the same way because the Cincinnati Union Terminal is here every day, and you drive by it every day. But if you look into it carefully, and you look at the history of this building, and see what it means both locally and nationally, you will realize that you do have a remarkable treasure. So let's take a little trip through memory lane and through what we have done in the last 80 years to understand what we know and what we're up against. First of all, it is a really big site. It is very, very big. If you think about it, when the project originally was conceived in the late 1920s, they brought under one roof 7 railroad companies and consolidated 5 railroad stations. Gigantic project by any standards then or now. And it was a place that originally was a very bucolic park. Lincoln Park, part of the neighborhood, part of the city. And nobody can imagine that there was this dramatic transformation because that's really where the park was. That's the relationship between the station and the park. And later, the consolidation of the train stations and the tracks started happening. And eventually, this masterpiece was created by a collaboration between Feldheimer and Wagner in New York, experts in railroad stations, and Paul Philippe Gray from Philadelphia, an expert and brilliant designer in Art Deco. And if you look at this diagram very carefully, you will realize that it was probably one of the earliest intermodal transportation hubs in the world. On the west side, you had a series of platforms and tracks, and coming into the building and under the building, you had 3 ramps, one for automobiles, one for buses, and one for light rail. Actually, this feature has helped the transformation of the structure into a museum in normalcy, and we'll talk about it in a moment. And these 2 firms actually created an incredible development opportunity for the city of Cincinnati and became what we know today as a gateway to the West. And a little footnote, a month before the railroad station opened, there was a flood. The only thing that stayed above water was the station. And they opened a month early because they needed to have everything in place and start the service. It was built like a battleship, actually better than a battleship. We have not seen this much steel in a building of this period. And surprisingly, it took only 3 years to complete the entire project. And it was indeed something unique, something that nobody has seen before. And experts say that it's probably the most significant Art Deco building in America today. And if you analyze the building, you realize that all of the features that were put in place in the original design are working to our advantage today as a museum, as a structure that can accommodate millions of people every day. And we also have the ability to put all sorts of exhibits because the building was designed originally to accommodate very, very heavy loads. So if you look carefully through this section under the building, right below our feet, we had the ramps. And below the ramps, we had 2 levels of garages, baggage handling area, completely open spaces that Art and his team in 1990 took advantage of and created all the exhibit areas that we see today. It's an incredible combination of very historic, very iconic spaces and very utilitarian areas that work again to the advantage of the museum. And if you analyze the building, you will realize that most of the real estate is from this level down. You see the iconic rotunda, but we have about 400,000 square feet on this floor and the floor below and the floors below. And the way the building was designed gives us the opportunity to revisit it today and do a renovation for a museum space this time, using the latest standards of museum planning and design and systems technologies. So this is what the site looked like when the project was completed. An incredible park, the facility, and all of the amenities that were necessary to accommodate literally hundreds of thousands of passengers. And it was a unique site, truly unique site. And slowly over time it changed. Now here's some things that we see but we don't see today. These are the ramps. Actually, they're right next to us. If you look beyond that window, the ramps that you see here are right next to us. And the scale is amazing. That, to put in perspective, this is a space where you could accommodate buses. One of the things we don't see today, because it's disappeared, is what was spanning across the tracks. This was this incredible concourse level that had all sorts of platforms connecting to the train platforms. And what we know today are the murals that are at the airport. That's the only thing that is left. The building has some quirks. When we take the tour, we will understand what this fountain is and what it does and what it means. Think about it this way. This fountain is on top of the galleries because the building extends below the apron in front of the building, and this fountain sits on top of some of the exhibit areas. In fact, the end of the building is approximately where the edge of the fountain, the east edge of the fountain is. The details in this building have remained intact, even though over time there were many, many changes. This is one of the many attempts to modernize the station and put in the rental car kiosks. But nobody could touch really the rotunda. This is a spectacular space. It has probably one of the finest collections of materials found in a 20th century building. And with little polish and little care, we can bring it back to life. So when somebody sees the building today, the problem we have is that it's very photogenic. Everybody will say, it looks great, what's wrong with it? Where's the problem? I cannot see it. You will see today in the tour that actually it's not doing very well as a building. It needs some repairs, some attention. As we said, it's very photogenic. It has an incredible collection of materials and details that you cannot find anywhere else. So, if you look behind the surface, you will realize that we have systems that they far exceeded their useful lives. Some of the systems are well over 50 years old. The last major renovation in 1990 was not really a full renovation. It was an attempt to bring all these museums under one roof. It was an experiment. Art, my partner calls it an experiment that has been going strong for 25 years. Because at the time, nobody knew that this experiment was going to succeed. So the investment was in bringing the exhibits and the organizations under a roof, but not necessarily paying attention to the building. So in 2005, 2006, our team was engaged to do the master plan. And when we started walking through the building, we realized that there were troublesome signs. So one of the things that we did really a scientific analysis of the exterior building envelope. And we used 21st century technology that allows us to literally do an MRI of the building and figure out what is concealed deterioration of the building. And here you see thermal imaging of the building that identify what we call them anomalies, meaning discontinuities in the fabric that they tell us that we have a concealed problem. So we started looking at the building carefully, and we actually did probes. And one of the probes that we did was very detailed. We opened up a chunk of the building to understand what happens between steel and masonry and how much deterioration we have and where. And it was clear that our instruments were giving us the right signals and the right information. And that gave us the confidence to begin to shape a program for the exterior building envelope. But we also saw other things that needed attention. This is what happens in Dalton Street. Don't forget that there is a bridge that spans over Dalton Bridge, and a part of it sits on top of the building, the other half is on the east end of Dalton Street, and you do have a significant amount of deterioration above a public street. So we went through a very careful analysis of the building, and we identified preservation zones, historic areas, significant areas, and so on. But more importantly, we tried to figure out how you can make sure that the museum will work better within this building for the next 30 years. And one of the things that we did as part of the master plan was to identify one area that we needed to look at very carefully, because actually it was at risk, and use it as a test area to figure out all the pieces of the puzzle, so that when and if and going forward the museum goes ahead with this project, we had the answers with certainty of what the critical issues were of the project. So we selected roughly the space we're in. It is actually this corner and the envelope that surrounds us. And if you look at it, the space at the top is the Cincinnati dining room, and then upstairs are the historic dining rooms. And we went back to our thermal scans, and we figured out where we needed to do interventions in the envelope, and we started dismantling the building. We exposed the steel, we did the repairs, and then we started putting back the building to complete the envelope repair, all the roof deck repairs, a new roofing system, and make sure that the envelope with new windows and so on would be tight for the next at least 50 years. And inside the space, you have seen the end result of the interior finishes and what we did in recapturing areas that were at risk because we were very close to losing murals and so on. The building is still very big. It hasn't changed. We're looking at a facility that is roughly 500,000 square feet. As a museum, it is a very large facility. It's unique. There are not that many museums that have that size of footprint, spaces, and so on. And we identified about 4 or 5 critical categories of areas that we need to deal with. One is the building envelope. Regardless of whether you're going to build a new building or whether you're going to use an existing building, you need to have a building envelope that you can trust to put your museum, your collections in it. The advantage you have with this building is that it has been tested over time. And we know that with the right repairs, we can take a building that had a lifespan of about 80 years or so and double it again. We know the clinical behavior of the building, and we know what can be done, should be done to extend its lifetime. We do know that the building needs new systems. What does it mean? We're going to discuss it in detail over the next couple of days, but during the tour, you will see what the challenges are in terms of the existing systems. The third thing that we need to understand is that you have an asset, an amenity, but also a challenge in the rotunda. And we'll talk about the rotunda, what it means, and what can be done. In our opinion, it's an opportunity that you cannot find anywhere else. It's probably one of the greatest public spaces, indoor spaces in America, that can be used to the advantage of not just the museum, but the entire community. The next question that needs to be understood is what happens with logistics. And the tour will give you an idea of what the challenges are. And the last thing that we need to talk about is what happens with the site. How much of that needs to be part of the scope of work, where, what needs to be done, and what kind of scope of work. So the tour, albeit 3 hours, is not long enough, but it's going to give you a very good idea of what the issues are regarding the site and this building. With that, thank you.
Thank you, George. We're about ready to start the tour now. We're going to break into 3 groups. Do I have that? Doug, do I have the list of... You have the list. Steve has the list. We're going to break into 3 groups. The task force will stay as one group. Okay. The first group will be the engineers, architects, and construction managers, and that'll be led by Adam. Adam? Why don't you stand up, Adam, and all of the, well, I'll tell you what, let me start with the smaller groups first, Adam, and then who's ever left will be with you. The second group will be the task force itself, and that'll be led by Steve. So Steve, why don't, if you don't mind, why don't you go back there, and then Steve Terheiden, Bill Froley, Bob Sharon, Brian Hodgett, Chip Gerhardt, Doug McDonald, Francie Hiltz, Wick Ack, John Silverman, Kathy Merchant, Keith Oliver, Liza Smitherman, Mario San Marco, Murray Sinclair, Otto Budig, Bob McDonald, Kay Geiger, Scott Rowland, Steve Leeper, Tim Maloney, and Tom Gigidugi. I'm sorry, Tom, if I mispronounced your name. That group go with Steve. And Steve, why don't you gather them back there and get ready to go. The second group is going to be led by Stacy, who just handed me this sheet of paper. Stacy, right? Why don't we gather over here? That would be Stacy, Amy Cheney, Ann Sessler, Beth Benson, Dave Dzinski, Diane Courthouse Lochner, Elizabeth Pierce, Greg Warner, Jane McKnight, Lee Hoffheimer, Mabe, Mike Breitz, Peter Morocco, Robert Heidrenreich, Scott Dana Pfizer, Scott Yamfer, Scott Provancher, Sean Mumart, Shiloh Turner, and Tom Owen. That group will be over here. Then the names I haven't called are probably the task force members themselves, and they will go with Steve. If there's anyone that has not been called, please feel free to join a group. As you go through the tour, if you could think about insights that you gained from the tour, so when we get back together, we can discuss what we learned. Thank you.
Getting the elevator, we had walked through the concourse. This is the area that goes right over the top of all that. So now we're going to go behind the rotunda walls on this side. So come on through this way. hard to do with a large group. Just as a point of reference, the wall on your left is an exterior wall, an interior wall. The murals are on the other side of this wall on your left. The wall on your right, as you're walking towards me, is an exterior wall. So you can kind of see that the plaster is starting to come off, and the ceilings have gotten water penetration as well. Renovation areas at all. The only improvements that were made in this area back in the 1990 renovation, turning it into the was to add sprinkler systems and the automated fire alarm system. So other than that, you can see that for the most part, painted walls and the finishes that you see have never been touched since back in the 30s. So, and they're also obviously starting to deteriorate because of moisture on those exterior walls. Watch your step when you get to right here. You're going to walk up 2 steps. A little bit. Most tours that I give up here, I make people take the steps from the rotunda up to here. This special group, we thought we'd take an elevator up to the 3rd floor and just climb the last few steps. But we're in an area that we like to call high steel. We're going to actually go up there as well, up and over. This is kind of just to orient you a little bit. The area we just came from and that face of the building is the front of the building that way. So that's facing east. This is facing west, back this way. So the dome kind of comes down this way and tapers down to the back side. There's a catwalk that walks up and over the entire dome and comes right back down on the north side. So we're going to walk the catwalk steps to get up in there. You'll notice a couple things as you're in here. There's a lot of ductwork up here. All that ductwork is original installation. It was part of the ventilation and exhaust that the building had, but it's not currently used today. They didn't have air conditioning at the time, and most of the heat that they used was going to be steam heat. So you've noticed some of the radiators as we've walked around. That would be the heating source. There's no central air in those hallways that we were at, nor is there any up here. Most of this ductwork was left in place just because it didn't make sense to take it out. It would have been hard to get it out. The tower that we just climbed through, the steps coming up, off to the side of some of those areas were some remote doors. Those are mechanical rooms that were used for house some of the fans, the exhaust fans and the makeup fans that they were using to push some of this air around. As we go up, you'll see a whole bunch of things, but the one thing that jumps out at you is just the size and the magnitude of the big, large steel members and all the rivets that were put in place to hold it all together. I always like to think of, man, how did they put this together back in the day compared to the technology that we have today? It was probably a difficult challenge, but they put it together to last. I think they put it together thinking it would last a lifetime. And for the most part, a lot of the steel structure that you see here is in pretty good shape. There really has not been any water damage up in this area, at least that we've seen since we've been here. Back in the original installation, we understand that within the first 10 years, so between 1932 and 1942, there was water penetration getting into the rotunda through the ceiling. And if you look at some early pictures, you'll notice that there was some type of a mosaic styled, I don't know if it was tile or something on the exterior of the building, on the dome. And it leaked like a sieve is what ended up happening, but it looked very nice. It was all part of the Art Deco look. But they had since covered that over with the aluminum skin that you see up there today, and it's in pretty good shape. So no water has really penetrated to get into the dome area at all. We've been fortunate. But now all of the flat roofs around the perimeter of the building, we have had numerous leaks in those areas, some of which have just because of been age. The roofs reached their useful life and had to be replaced. Some of them was because of moisture getting in through the masonry. But neither of those problems really exist up here in the dome. As we start to climb up the ladder, there's a ladder over here that I'm going to take everybody up. It is going to be single file all the way up and all the way over. It'll be kind of hard to stop and talk as we're going up and over, but we'll try to make it in a way that everybody can kind of at least look both ways. And as you're walking up, just remember the front of the building is that way, the back of the building is that way. Yes, Bob?
Since it's so obvious here, could you explain what this is? Because this is not modern technology, and people are probably wondering, what is that terracotta colored stuff?
Yeah, some of that terracotta colored brick that you're seeing is reminiscent of like a back, that's how they built the construction of part of the walls that weren't really finished. These aren't finished areas, we're in back of the house areas. So this was used as a way of supporting between the structure, like over there and over here. It could also be something that they could have fastened to on the other side. So they've put plaster over either plaster or concrete on the face of this, but this is a non-finished area.
But this would just be a wall system like in offices,
Like
the
it's
hallway-
lathing, in other words.
Yeah, so it's, instead of lath or, and
Yeah.
the systems or the studding, I mean, that's your stud system there. One thing just to notice that, you can see here, this concrete's very clean. That's because there's no water leakage. And, but then if you look back in here, you see that damage, that's the result of the water leakage. And as much as we talk about the challenges, we don't want you to leave here without the understanding, these are all very fixable. This is not a situation that's not fixable. It absolutely is. And I would say, the building's 80 years old. It survived with almost no care for 80 years. This is something that, investing in gives it another long life cycle. So it's not something that we're fixing it for a few years. It's, fixing especially the steel treatment outside. We're probably talking hundreds of years before that'd ever be necessary to deal with again.
Sounds like the other tour's catching up, so we better start walking this way. What? You're up in the attic. Yeah. It is hard to believe, and I almost hate to talk about it because sure enough, we start talking about it, something's going to happen. I'm sorry about the quickness of how we had to walk through that space being single file. I always like to talk about the winch that's up there and the cable system and how we hang stuff from the rotunda ceiling. That big old winch thing in the middle is what they used back in the day. We don't use that now, but there's two littler ones that we use to support the flag that you saw when you came into the rotunda. But we can hang things from there. But if you ever, when you get downstairs and look up, you'll probably for the first time realize, gee, there's 8 holes on the ceiling of the rotunda towards the front side of the building. Well, you just were above each of those holes kind of looking down. I didn't stop and let you look down, but you could physically walk out on a catwalk and look down. We just don't have time to do all that today. So any questions about what you saw up there? Can we do it again? Absolutely, absolutely. We just have, but before we do that, we got to take the rest of the tour and come back. If you still got energy, we'll do it.
It's not a problem as long as we keep building. If somebody decided to demolish it someday, then they've got a serious cost associated with that. But that'd be a lot of remediation. But as long as we keep it in place, we don't move it.
What about mold?
Well, I think when you'll see some mold a little bit, but all that's curable. I mean, it'll dry out and kill it, and so and it's worked pretty well in the parts that we've redone. And we've also replaced all the roofs on the building in the last 5 years. So and we've got a few leaks now, but we've replaced every flat surface roof on the building through the place the last 5 years.
Building, we got to look at that masonry component and find out what needs to be done there.
And we can show you what the solution was on one section we did on that.
Okay, let's head out this way. You saw glass and you thought, oh, it's all the same window. Well, they're not. It's two different systems. There's an exterior system, which is on this side, and there's an interior system, which is on this side, and there just happens to be a 3-foot walkway between the two, which is also glass, so we like to go between the glass to show things up here. This happens to be the floor where the clock is at, so each of you are going to get the opportunity to at least step up and look and see inside the main clock that you saw on the front of the building. As you're walking through this area, You'll notice there's like bars that come in from the outside. Those are like part of the operators that open the windows. So just watch your knees. Don't hit your knees on them as we're walking through. And then there's some other support equipment on the walls that you don't want to rub up against either. So just be careful as we're going. Yeah, go up this. If you haven't seen it yet, go up here. I'm sorry.
You want to see the clock. The clock is cool.
And just wait for us over there on the other side if you don't mind.
What if the person doesn't come down?
I'm sorry?
We can't get down.
Use some public tours in these spaces, limited.
Head on down that way.
No, they go to some of those spaces, but they can't do all of it. Yeah, well, that's what they do. That's kind of our equivalent.
Okay.
We need to go ahead.
We good?
I love it. My favorite was a little.
Little clock.
Oh,
Yeah.
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 That's like.
I think that should be good.
So this was just. We opened this in the summer.
No, we don't. These only open during.
Big clocks. I like it.
By the way, it's all original. Only the motors have been replaced, and heaters were added because it was a little bit of a problem in very cold temperatures. So we have a volunteer who actually designed a maintenance protocol for us. What lubricants we have to use, he added the electric motor, rewired everything, added the heaters, and there it goes, it's back to run.
Yeah.
And it still keeps. Is that what she said? I don't know.
Hey, we're going this way. Let's go this way.
Stacy's in charge.
So what is it?
We're going to go back.
Well, it's not just in different directions.
Take advantage of this floor space and pick up some additional space down in the building where mechanical systems are at now that would be better used or better served for either exhibits or for the possibility of rental space, things that we could, revenue generating space. When you were upstairs in the clock area, I didn't get a chance to talk to each of you as we were in there, but you saw the big piece in the middle, which is the driving mechanism for the motor. Underneath that, there's a series of weights that are lifted up every 30 minutes, and those weights then for the next 30 minutes are used kind of like a grandfather clock, where the hands are all moved by the gravity of that weight being pulled down. Kind of like what you have at home in a grandfather clock. You wind it up every week and it'll last the rest of the week. Well, here there's an electric motor that brings those weights up every 30 minutes, and then it just drives down from there. So it's a neat piece of history that everybody seems to like. The face of the clock is about 18 feet in diameter. You don't really realize or have that in perspective when you're up next to it, but when you're standing out in front of the building when you're leaving today, take a look back up there and see how big it really is. The other thing that's always kind of interesting is that on both sides of the clock, when you walked from between the glass up into the clock, you kind of stepped out of the building and up into an area that's freestanding. What I mean by that is there's a column on each side of the clock, and the clock is on the outside face of those columns. So if we could open up the floor below you in the clock area, you'd see that you're looking straight down to the roof. You're not in the building anymore. So when you're out in front of the building, and again, you look up at that, you can kind of tell what I'm talking about. So I don't like to say those things too much to people that are squeamish while they're up there, but yeah. And there was a question about the glass in terms of why are the panels that you walk on glass? Well, if you think about how the sun rises in the east, which is facing directly that way, and the sun's coming up, we have this beautiful image of sun coming into the building every day, and that sun comes right through those windows into the rotunda, and all those murals start glistening with that sun. Well, if you didn't have those clear paneled floor panels that you're walking on, there'd be a shadow because of the way the sun was being broken up. But the glass floor allows the sunlight to go right through it and give you more of an image of sunlight in the building. The other question is, why do we have these here? People don't understand why these walkways are here. Well, these windows used to be opened manually every day when they needed them, so they'd have to send somebody up to open up windows, and you had to have a way to get out there. We've automated some of those operators so that they're tied to our smoke evacuation system. So if we had a fire in the rotunda, they automatically open, and then the smoke can be exhausted out of the building through those windows. So, any questions?
So Steve has been with us since 2000.
2000?
And we were delighted that we hired him away from managing the Kroger building.
Well, there was a little stint in there. Kroger
Okay.
building was a
Yeah.
while before that.
He-
And
he- so he did-
Keith Oliver used to know me way back then too.
he
works for Kroger.
He's got a real passion for this.
Bulging walls. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It gets more and more difficult every day. You know, you only can do so much to try to make it look right when you've got so many things working against you.
Exactly. Like you said, it nobody sees, but that's the beauty of it. Is when you're
Yeah.
in there, you think it's just the
Well,
spin shop.
Well, you know, I always like to use this example. It's not your typical job where you come to work every day just to open up the office, to let people come in. This is where I need you to watch your head. If you'd see or understand the people that come through our doors, a lot of those people are older folks that remember something about it when it was a train terminal. And I like to equate it to when, and you come to work every day to take care of a living memorial, you don't just take it for granted. You try to get it looking as best you can so that when those people come over from wherever they may be coming in their walks of life, they can see it and appreciate it. So here's where I need you to watch your head, please. Just be careful as you're walking through here. Head this way. Couple steps up. Couple steps down. We're not 100% sure. We can only speculate why the north side gets probably more damage than that south side, because the south side has the prevailing winds and rains and weather coming in from the west, which is in that corner, but it's in pretty good shape. We're wondering, or we talked yesterday, that maybe this is because it doesn't dry out quick enough after storms or after that weather comes through. So maybe that's a reason why the north side has so much more deterioration. But you can look at the exterior walls and you can literally, and you don't have to touch it, but it's just flaking off. As you walk through here, we literally had to take part of the ceiling down because it was collapsing. But there's a lot of water damage that's happened in this hallway here.
None of this is heated or cooled up here now at all, correct?
It has steam heat, yes. But no cooling, no air blowing or anything like that. As opposed to back in the 1990 renovation, part of the windows over on the south side and west side have been replaced. These have not. So there is a constant problem with just that these aren't very well insulating type windows for this area, so it doesn't help. You also notice that they have window air conditioners in some of these windows. There's not a central air handling system for this area yet. So the only cooling they have is from these window air conditioners, and the heat source that they have is steam heat, which is around the perimeter of the room. So we've renovated it to try to make it usable space. If nothing else, we've just kind of masked all the problems around the perimeter of the room with some new fresh paint and some drywall. We literally had to make some provisions above the ceiling to get some of the moisture that's dripping in from the masonry up above to go out through some openings or some gutter systems up above here to try to keep water out of this area. But it may look like halfway decent office space, but it's not in very good shape right now. When we go out on the roof, which is going to be something we're doing next, you'll be able to look up into this area from outside.
They've maintained this space all themselves.
Oh, I love it.
And they are,
Hi, good to see you.
so are you talking about rail buffs?
Yeah.
These are rail buffs.
Oh my gosh, this is fabulous.
Of that tile, that is where the switch used to stand. And if you look over that picture underneath the wall over there, you'll see the gentlemen that are standing in the room, and they're looking at this big box that's on the floor where this black outline is. That's where the switching was. The concourse would have gone out from the back side of this building all the way out to approximately where you see that electric tower out there. This roof that you're seeing out here now is where what houses the OmniMax Theater. So this was all constructed as part of the 1990 restoration of the building to convert it into museum center. But the concourse would have been right in line with this and would have gone all the way out to about where that electric tower is at. There's some pictures around here. This is all kind of shows what the back of the building looked like, or the entire building with the concourse out the rear. This area is currently kind of occupied by the Cincinnati Railroad Club. They've been great stewards of the building for many, many years, and this is their hangout, and they have a real passion for trains and train travel. They've got a big library here that they man, and they also come up on Saturdays and Sundays and let the public come up here and take a look at what train travel used to be about, and they'll tell you stories that they just never seem to stop with. They just go on and on, but it's great. It's a great testament to what train travel used to be and still is and could be, and there's a lot of memorabilia here about what it looked like back in the day. They've got a bunch of pictures up here. Here's the original phone that sat here that they called different, I guess, towers from.
The other thing I find interesting from this view is, if you look over here, close your right, you see the city's public safety building?
The one with the flag on it is the city's.
So that, see how the hill's cut off and it's shorter than the ones around it? That's because they cut the entire top of these hills off to fill this in. So you see, when Dr. Scarmia showed you the photograph, because it was a park and you had lakes here, there's 20 feet of fill underneath this whole site. They filled all the lakes in, they filled it all in, and they filled it all in so that the Mill Creek, which runs right through the middle of this, basically get all this up out of the floodway of Mill Creek. So that wouldn't happen today. They fill that much wetlands, but it's 20 feet of fill, and they built a rail line and had hopper cars up to the side.
It's an active train yard today. There's a lot of intermodal traffic back behind us. I think this is one of the largest intermodal yards where they're taking those what appears to be truck boxes and putting them on top of the train cars.
This is Otto's favorite place because all those yellow units out there that move these boxes around, that's Otto's business.
Yes.
I-75 behind us, so facing west.
Yeah, we're facing west, so I-75's out that way.
Probably
Yep.
more than a nickel.
Yep. If you go to either end and look back, you can probably see part of it. More so probably on this side than on that
Get on
side.
a train in New York City, come to Cincinnati, go through Washington, D.C., come to Cincinnati, go to Connersville, Indiana, up to Chicago. That's the route. It's called the Cardinal and the Hoosier State.
How long does that take?
Long time. Didn't even put the times on it.
Have you been over here Cincinnati recently?
Oh, is there a new one? It's not as bad as this one. As my group's coming out, it's worth taking a look right here on this, above this window. This is kind of a good example of one of the brick right above this window header. It's bulging out and pushing away. The reason it's doing that is because of the steel construction that's behind it that has gotten wet over the years, and as that steel gets wet, it rusts. As it rusts, it expands. As it expands, it pushes. So what you're seeing there is literally the bricks that are pushing out off the wall. So this is an isolated example of what we think is going to start happening in other places around the building. You can see all of these windows are the single pane windows. These are all the original windows. If you look right above each window, especially up there, the rust that's happening on what they call the lintel, which is the piece that goes right across the top of the window. We've got a good example in an exhibit that we put together when we did Project One a few years ago. We took a lot of pieces out of that and put a video together so people could see what that project was all about. We took one of those window lintels out and have it on display, and the amount of rust and deterioration on one of those lintels is what's going on behind the wall, which you can't see, was just unbelievable. So as you come around here, you're going to look at, one of the things I like to point out is this parapet wall system. The parapet is this little short knee wall between here and here that kind of hides the roof from everybody down below. You know, they can see that we're standing here, but they can't see the roof. All these flat roofs have been replaced, but when we replaced them up to this flashing. We didn't go any higher. We didn't do anything on the masonry or the caps or on the exterior. So part of the problem is, as the moisture still gets in some of these areas, it's getting into the wall system and dripping down into the building. And that's where you're seeing some of the water that you were looking at when we were upstairs walking through those hallways.
Steve, keep the pump the brick off and then repair it and put the brick back on?
That'll be part of it. Yeah, that's what we had to do on Project 1. What we literally did was we took the parapets all the way down to the roof and looked at the steel that was in there, and then we made repairs, or we waterproofed it with some epoxy, so that as that steel was cleaned up, then we were able to either put it back in place and hopefully never get moisture in it again. But areas like that, all these windows would have to be replaced, and as part of that window replacement process, you'd pretty much take all those lintels out of the top of there and get in and make those repairs. So in the area like where you're seeing the brick being pushed off over there, certainly that's all going to have to be taken down from between those two windows to figure out what's going on behind it to put it back in. Now, does that mean that entire field of brick that you see right there, the same thing has to happen? No. You know, we're not going to have to take everything down, but what we did on the south side during Project 1 is we opened up and exposed some of the more obvious places, like the corners where you're going to have problems, and we took the brick off there to look at what the main steel members were looking like. We found that a lot of them were in pretty good condition, but they did have rust, so we ground down that rust and then we treated it with that epoxy to cover it, and then we put it back together so that water hopefully will never reach that steel again. If you look on the curved or arched wall over here at the bottom of the dome, that's where we had just walked through. As you kind of come out here, you can see a lot of the cracks in the masonry up there. You can also see a bunch of cracks that have been infilled on this wall right here. That's the office that we just walked through up on that third floor where the window air conditioners were at. There's a great deal of masonry work that needs to be done on that wall versus maybe that wall that's over here.
allowed the aluminum to all be used to redo the entire dome because the troop went through the building at the time. Part of the just interesting history is, so Cincinnati, we believe, was the first integrated USO in the United States. So all the other USOs were all segregated, except Cincinnati was the first one that was actually integrated. Keeps looking. Where we see like the darker line between the bricks, that's really evidence of a split apart. The dark line between the bricks, so where you see the crack in the curve. Then you notice when you go further down the walls, you can see it. That's because the point that's better.
Yeah, now we're going to go over to the opposite side and show you the green roof that was all part of Project 1. Sorry? It should.
This is the section we did that we call Project 1. So basically, if you just take a straight line out, corner of the building, over there, and then straight back. Everything has this new roof system. So this is where we decided, what we discovered was we had historic fabric in this area we wanted to protect and risk because of the roof systems. And we also discovered the engineering approach that we've done is every problem. Actually a piece of metal that comes out. Well, that's because we've created ways to actually take the moisture and shed it and shove it out from underneath them so they don't actually go on down through, and created weep holes and protection for that. and this was torn down to about a foot below those, 2 feet below those windows.
Yes,
Steve,
yes.
you're out here, so
Yes.
take over.
You were doing well. Gave me a break. Yeah, this area that we're talking about, especially if you look on this back wall, was something that we kind of looked at this whole face. This is all part of Project One. From here out to that corner, across, and back to this corner. Everything from this footprint straight down was where we replaced windows, we opened up masonry, we took down parapets, we took off a rooftop air conditioner and replaced it with an in-house air handler that's tied to our chilled water system, so we can take advantage of the cooling opportunities through our chilled water system as opposed to this electric hog that we had sitting up here on the roof. And then the green roof is something that was rather unique in the fact that in most green roof systems you have a lot of weight that gets put on top of your roof. We had to take part of the concrete and make up what's underneath what you're standing on down a little bit to lighten the load so that we didn't have too much weight here. So what you've got now is this is working, this is doing what we want it to do. It's keeping the heat and the cold from getting into the building. It's absorbing most, if not all the water that would come down from a rainfall. Metropolitan Sewer District was involved with this process because they were advocating that we try to do something to kind of keep water out of their sewer system. So through these little these devices that you see on top of these drains, there's measuring devices that are watching how much water is actually going down the drains during the rainfall, and they're finding out that very little, if any, water is making its way from this roof area down into the system. It's all staying here, being absorbed or evaporated right here, which is great.
So usually you can't do green roofs on existing buildings, but because of the structural capacity of these roofs, and we were able to take back some of the load that's actually here and remove it and take weight off the roof. We were actually able to put this green roof, which is actually a different kind of membrane, but we were able to actually use green roof systems in doing that. And it's a personal thing for me. I've seen green roofs every once in a while that get irrigated, and I question the sustainability of irrigated green roofs or how that fits and really makes sense. This is not an irrigated green roof. The plants, we don't do anything with it. Other than the first year when you're planted, we put some water up here, but that's been it. So it's really worked real well.
And if you're not familiar with a green roof, it looks terrible right now, like everybody else's yard probably does this time of year. But in the spring and in the summer, all these plants will come back to life. It'll look very lush and green. It won't dry out and doesn't need any water because the sedum that we've planted here is very water. It doesn't need a lot of water. It's very drought tolerant.
I love that we had the railing down here. These are things you love to do. That's so hard. That's so 80 years. Right up here. Now we have to it's still raining.
Back exactly the way it was. All these light fixtures were taken down, even though they are original, but they were taken down. They were refurbished and brought back to what today's electrical standards would be so that we could put them back up. We've taken advantage of some new features just to allow us little conveniences. For example, if there was an event going on in there, which there is today, and we did not want to disturb anybody that's there, we can flip a switch and these shades will go down. Those were not part of the 32 fabric of the building, but it allows us to give some separation. The floor is all new. As we walk back through here, we're getting into an area that we like to call the historic dining rooms. These were originally called the private dining rooms, but we don't call them that because part of the project cost was funded by public, so we didn't want to turn it into a private thing and make it sound like it's the wrong way. But each of these dining rooms were what, if you were a traveler coming into the station back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and you wanted to get something quick to eat, you'd stop in the room that we were having our meeting this morning, which is the Saniville Cafe. There was a couple of serpentine counters there that you could come up to the counter, sit down at the counter, somebody would serve or wait you right there, get your food order and serve you right at the counter. If you had time to sit down, you could go back into the Cincinnati dining room, which was more of a linens and china and silverware and glass. You could sit down at a table and a waiter would come around and serve you that way. If you were a business traveler that wanted to have a meal and you wanted to be somewhat secluded, you'd come up to what they were calling at the time the private dining rooms. This is where if you didn't want to have a meeting down in the middle of those two rooms, you could come up here and have a more private, intimate meeting in this space. And as you start to look at the finishes that are in here when we go in there, you're going to see it's remarkable that they spent that much effort into how they designed this room, but it's beautiful. The room can be subdivided into 3 separate rooms, or there's partitions that will, accordion partitions that come together to close off the room into 3 separate rooms. So there's 3 doors. The other interesting thing is, we got room? Well, before you come in, hang on one second. I wanted to talk about, there was a lot of effort put into making sure that we did this the right way, from a preservation standpoint. You always want to restore things back the way they were. Well, one of the things that we had to change was the size of this room. Right behind these gentlemen here was a room where they would do the dishes. This was actually a dish room. So if there was meals being served in here, they'd bring them up on the elevator, they would plate them up over in an area back in that corner back there, they would serve the meal, and then after the meal was over, the plates would go into the dish room and be washed. So everything was washed right here. They didn't have to take the plates and the silver and the chinaware downstairs to be done. It would just reside right here. Well, since we're not doing that anymore, we made this room a little smaller so that we'd have more size of a hallway for people getting in and out of these rooms. But we were conscientious of what was here. And if you look at the outline of this brown colored cork versus the dark versus the light, and the shape that it takes, you also notice the same shape up on the ceiling with that reveal right there. That's the exact location where the room used to come out to. So you can see that this hallway was only this narrow. So as we learned through the preservation efforts of George Skarmeas, you'd never want to take away something without remembering it. So we put something there as a reminder of what used to be in that space so it won't be forgotten. So now we can go on into the dining room. Just wanted to share that.
So this room has deteriorated, and so there's remnants of veneer on the walls in certain places, and it was pretty much shot. But the ceilings were still in place. We had this clean, and then this section right here by Marta. So these are the original doors. And so that's actually the original veneer. And so that was just cleaned up, and then this is all replaced veneer. So all the rest of the veneer is replaced. And so one of the things we did here was we talked to the Bulky Veneer Company in Fairfield, and they donated all the veneer to this entire room. So it would have been a pretty expensive proposition to put all this veneer back the way it was originally. They took a lot of pride in seeing how their product could get displayed and used here. And the tragic part of that story was it was Mark Volke who actually came and met with me, agreed, committed to do this, and he was killed about a month and a half later in a skiing accident. And so there's a plaque around the side in memory of Mark doing that. So this is, I would say that very little of the cost of the internal actually is about the historic nature. People say, well, what's the cost to historic landmark? That's not where the costs are. It's mechanical systems, structural. It's the historic fabric is really this room, the Cincinnati dining room, which we're done, and then that Los Angeles room. There's not a lot that's required in the other spaces. Cleaning, repairing the front doors of the building, the same way the doors on these spaces are done, things like that. But that's not where the cost is. So where we had an opportunity to really kind of preserve what was originally here, we wanted to take advantage of that. So we use this for meetings and rent out and use it for different things. Dinner's here tonight. So I think we can.
Yeah, we can head back down. We'll get ahead of that.
Get ahead of them. Go ahead.
The room is the one we were overlooking from the balcony up above. You can look at the mural, which is a stylized version of some buildings around the city, but it also has different modes of transportation to the airplanes, to the taxis and buses, to trains and to boats. Union Terminal's right here. The street grid that you see there is a pretty good representation, we think, of what the street system looked like in Cincinnati. You can see the Ohio River and the Licking River that are coming off of that. The one thing that I'll point out about how they cleaned this mural, because there was conservators that were here on scaffolding that took them all the way up right underneath it, so they were working with things from like Q-tips and toothpicks and things that you wouldn't believe just to recondition what was there. And if you look in that corner right there, and you see that square box, it looks dark, That was the one area that they purposely did not clean to show you the difference between what the entire thing looked like before and after they've cleaned it. So you can envision, though, back in the time, with these windows were probably open because they didn't have air conditioning, so air would come in from the steam engines that were right out adjacent to the building. People used to smoke cigars and cigarettes in these buildings for years, so there was a lot of dirt and grime that was on there. So when they conserved this, it really brought out the beauty of what was underneath it. We redid all these lights in terms of making, again, these were original lights, but we took them down, reconditioned them, brought them up to electrical standards that we needed. You'll notice on these two horizontal lights on both sides, the round dots that are kind of on there, those were additional fixtures that were installed inside the lights to be able to shine up onto the mural. Those weren't there before. There wasn't light to really highlight or accent the mural in the past. So we took advantage of trying to design something that would give us some uplight to highlight that mural, but didn't compromise the integrity of adding another fixture someplace that would kind of clutter up the room. Kept the lines pretty simple and basic. These are new windows that are installed here. We had a lot of work that was done on the perimeter of this mural because all that drywall that you see had to all be taken down. That was an area that was damaged due to some of the water damage above. The other thing that's interesting to remember is the green roof that we were up looking at is directly right above us here. So, and it's also part of what's above the historical dining room as well.
So the original windows were metal you saw upstairs. The 1990 work replaced most all the windows with aluminum. Those failed in about 10 years, but they had a warranty. It was 20 years. The company went bankrupt in 10 years, and so didn't make it. So we priced it both ways. We didn't go back to that. We think have longer lifespan and more durability, and they have high insulation value in them. So they're not like the historic ones that were like single pane. We actually picked up the energy efficiency.
The other thing about these windows, you notice that there's some bars that are in there. You can open that up a little bit more so you can see it. But we also took advantage of reinstalling the operators that are in there. So there's these openings that you'll see here and over there where we can pop these plates out, and there's a crank that can be put in there. And those cranks can be used to literally open these windows. That was how they originally were, so we put them back with the same operators on there so that if we wanted to open these windows, we could. But for obvious reasons, because this is conditioned space, we typically keep them closed. But again, one of those meticulous pieces of making sure if you're going to restore it, you restore it back to what it originally was.
So if you want to grab a bottle of water, you can just grab it and keep on going. So
Bathrooms that you see right out in the concourse here. So this is kind of back of the house space. We talked about how to reclaim this and reuse it. There's been discussions about maybe putting a restaurant in here or using it for some other purpose for rental space to try to be able to make revenue generating spaces, but this could be that.
the originated bathtub, we're not putting it back.
Yeah.
Only one.
Just in case.
Yes.
UTPO, Doug. Okay. I'm going to go this way then. I'm going to go down onto the platform. It would have been like my 5th time in 2 days to do it. Oh, yeah. As soon as the last person gets on the step, which might be Francis. Just wanted to tell you, we're getting ready to go out onto the train platform. It is an active train yard. You'll notice a yellow line that's on the pavement. Don't go on that side of that line. Stay on this side. We try to keep you away from the tracks as much as possible, plus CSX doesn't like us walking around out there. But I did want to give you an opportunity to at least see what train travel was like. This is the last remaining platform on the back side of the building. The corridor, the stairs that you're coming down, is not currently used. There's another one on the other side that we're going to come up after we get through the exterior tour that you'll be able to see how it's used. But this is just a way for us to get at the far south end of the platform, and then we're going to walk due north so you can kind of see the length of the platform. And there's a train right here. Moving.
Schedule, Steve. Good job.
5 minutes early. I told him to be here 10 minutes ago. About 8 all the way out, yeah. There's the yellow line that I talked about. Oh yeah. If you were catching a train out of Amtrak, this is where you would pick it up. They have an office upstairs on the concourse level, and we'll show you that upstairs, but they bring the passengers down right here in the middle. They come out onto this landing here and get on the train. As you're walking down here, I want to point out, this is the concourse that's coming out from the back of the building. And if you look right up here, as we get about, I don't know, 50 feet down, you'll see the big I-beams that were cut off that would have been where the concourse would have jetted out behind the building.
That went all the way to the tower?
Approximately to the tower, yes.
If you look at the exterior of the building, that's project 1. You can see where the corner over there was totally along the top, half far down the brick were removed. It's not like all the brick are taking off. We're just going so far we can actually intervene. So you can see the different fashion systems. You can see how that is.
Notice on that corner, though, the different colorations of brick. I don't know if Doug pointed that out. We tried to mix some of the old and the new, but they don't make that brick anymore. Okay, we're going to walk this way. Just be careful with the train. I-beams that were cut off. That would have been where the concourse would have gone out from here. Did you? Yeah? Was it as big as I envisioned in the pictures and everything? Well, back then it had to look big. Yeah. Some of the pictures that we have with wall-to-wall people, it's amazing. I can only think of what it would have been like to have been, traveling through here and be in that kind of congestion. Well, yeah, I mean, the way the building's designed and laid out, and how the flow of people, the flow of cars, the flow of everything, it was done very well. Yes, Amtrak. Yep, they operate 6 nights a week. Their hours of operation are 11 p.m. till 7 a.m. So if you wanted to catch a train out of Cincinnati, you do it in the middle of the night. Typically one a night. It's a matter of whether it's going one east or north, east or west. Other company, I forget the name of it, but it's not there anymore. It's just a storage room. I'd like to bring everybody to this corner right here and kind of look. Gives you a good bird's eye view of the width and the length and the depth of this building. I think Doug or George said something earlier about when you come up to the front of the building, you certainly have direct recognition of the rotunda, front of the building, and how big it is, but you don't really know what's behind it and under it and down in front of it. And this gives you kind of a good bird's eye view. We were up on the roof where you see the gentleman up there now. We were also up in Tower A, which is all the way up there in the top. We were also at the top of the dome, which is all the way up there. We have not gone out onto the ramps. Part of that tour is going to be for tomorrow, but both ramps go out, in the front of the building. There's actually 3 different levels, so you can see all 3 of them from here. There's the lower ramp, the middle ramp, and the upper ramp, all used for different modes of transportation, whether it was a car and taxi or a bus or a streetcar, or a trolley, light rail, yeah. Bad choice of words. The track that you see here is one that they use as kind of a siding. It is used on a regular basis, but you can start to see or understand the problem of what it means when you get close to the concourse. If you're a double-decker train and you've got to get under the concourse, you could potentially have a problem. I believe they lowered this area as part of an effort to see whether or not that would make more sense to dig it out, lower the track instead of tearing the concourse down. But as we all know, they decided that it made more sense just to tear the concourse down so all those double-decker trains could get underneath if it was a problem.
Go back down, I think they're going to the basement. No part of the building is actually going to upgrade. The entire building is upgrade. And so you're basically 7 stories kind of stacked up there. It's about 9 stories up to Tower A. Okay, now we're going to show you something that very, very few people ever see.
What? No, not yet, but we're heading there.
Oh, okay.
I keep you guessing. Yes.
This is all original. This is baggage ramp that you have to bring it up. People drop your baggage up on the hump. This building's now connected to the post office next to the point. And there's actually a separate post office just for rail cars. And so the rail cars can drop the mail off behind the post office up here. And separate facilities for
Man, sure do.
That's a steam generation, power to the power plant, which is part of the whole project.
The ramp that we just came up isn't used by the public right now, but Amtrak uses it to service to get down to the train. If the public were here to catch a train, they would come out of those doors right there and go down these steps, which is what we're going to do in a minute. There's also an elevator in the lobby over there that can take you down to the platform as well. But Amtrak, I believe, still has some baggage that they'll take from the passengers and take it out. And since their operation is up here, they have to find a way to get those bags down to the track. So this ramp area allows them to go down to the tracks and be able to take the baggage to the trains. As we go down, yeah, we're just going to kind of walk down to where the public would go out now, but we're going to keep going straight across, Doug, to where those doors are there. Then you get to see the piece that you were talking about. MC1 to base. If you're referring to doors that are open back in Amtrak, that is one of the tours. Okay, hang on, Doug. There you go. No, maybe. Did you?
Did George put the receive view?
These doors time out, so just make sure it doesn't go closed on you.
Off the trains and then unloaded up on the sidings, like your carry-on. The serious luggage you had, which is in the cargo, that was your plane, same thing in the rail cars, and that actually was all loaded and brought underneath. And so what we're walking into now is actually there's a tunnel system that goes back the full length of the concourse, so 400 feet back. Huge tunnel system, all the luggage came in underneath. The tunnel still runs underneath all those rails up. Now, they blocked it off. Some of those cookies through one wall. And this here was all open, okay? And here's, so this is siding one, and then we have those going back 14 going back. And then there's a tunnel, there's like a siding like this comes down off each one of them. It comes down here and then feeds this, and then they can take the luggage. And they can also take it straight outside. So for things that freight they were bringing in to go straight off to some other place, this is the transportation point to move that to trucks or whatever. But our staff had kind of fun one time. They decided to make a haunted house down here and scare their staff members by pretending that they brought bodies back in World War II, but they didn't have like live ammo signs. They didn't bring bodies back in World War II, and like we did. So it was better that our staff, some of our staff didn't know their history well enough to know that was really a ruse the second they started to think about it.
This tunnel that we're going to walk through now is used by my engineering department. They keep their tools, materials, stuff like that to take care of the building. But if you notice, this tunnel that goes through here used to go straight through and all the way over to the post office. I thought we referenced that when we were upstairs, but this is how they would take mail to and from the post office to get on the trains. So it would walk through here. But right now, this space...
This is above ground, above grade out this way.
Yes. It's above ground is what he says. This is a terrible place to try to talk because it's so noisy, but I'll try to give you some idea where we're at now. As I mentioned in the back, this is our mechanical area where our engineers keep all their materials and supplies. There's a room right there with computers in it. There's a series of 3 different computers. Those are our energy management computers, which are used to control a lot of the equipment in our building, whether it's air handlers or fans or pumps, motors, all is being controlled by computers. So we're monitoring temperatures, pressures, humidities, all that stuff is coming out of that room right there. We also watch and keep an eye on the Geyer Collection and Research Facility, which is about a mile away from here where we keep all of our collections. There's a computer in there also where we keep an eye on that. We're going to go back into this room where it gets a lot noisier, so I want to try to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what you're going to see. The first piece of equipment you're going to see is the emergency generator. This is where we got a lot of the mechanical systems of the building. Just to the left, there's an air compressor, which you can hear running right now. Air compressors are used for air, pneumatic air, to be pumped throughout the building for the purposes of controls, turning thermostats up and down, moving dampers and things like that. It's all done by pneumatic air pressure. So that air compressor is part of that. That's kind of old technology by today's newer standards. It's all DDC, which is direct digital control. We have a mixture of both, most of which though is all the pneumatic stuff, just because that's what was here back in '89 and we put it in, so we're still using it. So if you're going into a more modern building, you may not hear that noisy compressor. So now that it's quieted down, I don't have to yell as loud. As we go back into the big room, you're going to see boilers and chillers, pumps, electric, fire pumps. I mean, this to me is where the heart of the building is at, is what really comes down to. The air handlers are pieces of equipment that are around the perimeter of the building. So most of either the hot water or the cold water or the fire pump water or the domestic water that's coming from this area are all being piped to those areas for the purposes of using it for heating or cooling or whatever. So when we get inside, I'll share with you a little bit more about some of the equipment.
I will tell you
This is the play school room. Kidding. All the colors mean something. We'll start with the pink. The darkest pink is the hottest water coming from this boiler that's being pumped out to the building. Once it goes out into the building, it goes through an air handler or a coil. There's a fan that's blowing across that coil, and it's pushing that hot air that's being produced by the hot water going through the coil out into the space. Once all that water goes through the coil, it comes back in the light-colored pink to the boiler, and the process starts over. Now, I'm using these as a reference. These are not the two main lines that go out to the building. If you look on the back wall, you'll see all those larger 8-inch pipes with the pink colors on them as well. Same kind of thing. Dark pink's the hottest water going out. Light pink is coming back. We've got two big hot water boilers. This is one. There's another one down at the far end. This is a smaller boiler that we use in the wintertime. These were all put in back in the late 89 restoration or 90 restoration. They are on their last leg. Even though they may look attractive and look nice, we have had nothing but mechanical problems with these boilers. That one just had a problem that took us out of commission during the coldest period 2 weeks ago when we had all these frigid temperatures. That boiler was not operational because it sprung leaks on the inside. The steel on the inside of this thing is rupturing because of the age and the condition of it. We keep putting Band-Aids on it and we make these repairs, but it's getting harder and harder to do it. And without those boilers, when we get into those sub-zero temperatures, we run a real risk of doing damage to the collections or to the building. So the hot water boilers are for hot water purposes. These two little boilers, which are silver, are steam boilers. We produce steam to go out to some of those remote areas that we've been walking through where we've got cast iron radiators where we're putting steam to those to heat those spaces. We also use it for some humidification, so we can put humidity in the air, but not a lot. These two pieces of equipment over here are the chillers. They're centrifugal chillers, again with the color scheme. The dark blue is the coldest water being produced. The light blue is the cooler water coming back to be recycled again. The interesting thing about our chilled water system is not only does it produce cold water, it produces extremely cold water. As a matter of fact, 25-degree water. For you engineers in the crowd, we know that we can't pump 25-degree water because it'll freeze. So we put glycol in it. Glycol is an antifreeze that we mix with the water so that we can get those temperatures down to 25 degrees. The reason we take it down to 25 degrees is because right outside this wall, which we're going to walk out and see, are 16 large tanks. That's our thermal ice storage system. So what we do to try to keep utility costs down is we produce ice after hours at nighttime when the sun's down and the utility rates are a little bit better and the utility company gives us a break on our utility costs to use electric at night to produce ice. We get those tanks filled with ice, then we pipe through another series of coils that are going through that. We pipe water through there. We take that water and make it colder by taking that ice temperature and cooling that water, and then we send it out to the building for cooling purposes. So it's a unique way, it's kind of the green way of using a piece of equipment to give you some, I guess, a better way to operate your system. That was not put in recently, that was put in 1990, so that's been here for a lot of years. It's been a really good savior for us to keep our utility costs down. Now that my voice is about shot, there's any questions? We're going to go down this way and then take a left at the door down there, Doug.
Green State is set up two different grids, so they can switch over from one supply station to another. So generally, when we're putting energy, you don't get too many energy interruptions unless something moves up. Like one last year, usually pretty good. But all the power comes in right here.
The generator takes, good question, no. In case you're interested, the question Francie's asking is if we had an electrical outage, how much of that emergency generator serves the building? The emergency generator only takes care of emergency lighting, elevators, and fire pumps. That's the only thing. So we don't power the entire building off of that generator. We have a transfer switch here that will switch from each of those respective areas I just mentioned, emergency lighting, fire pumps, and elevators, over to that bank, and then we feed those pieces of equipment through the generator power. Basically, in an outage, you just want to have enough electric to get people out of the building safely and to make sure that the elevators are working and the fire pumps are working. Keith just asked a good question. Our chillers in there that I showed you, they're both 350 tons of refrigeration to a total of 700 tons of centrifugal chiller capability. But out here we added this. When we did Project 1, we didn't have enough capacity to add air conditioning to certain parts of the building with those two chillers. So we added this air-cooled chiller, which is 120 tons, to offset some of the load, but also give us the ability that on light load conditions, if we wanted to run just a 120-ton chiller as opposed to 1 or 2 350-ton chillers, we have that flexibility. So it's another kind of an economical way of utilizing a smaller piece of equipment that is not directly connected to that. And then these tanks that you see right here is what I was referring to as the thermal ice storage system. If you look at the network of pipes, it comes from the chiller, goes into those tanks, then goes back out of the chillers, but there's another series of coils and pipes that go through the inside of that. So the two water systems don't actually mix. You're transferring the cold water that's coming from the chiller to another set of pipes that are going through there that are freezing the ice.
So we cover Project 1, we're going to look at one section building. There's some other things in Project 1 also. You know, this, which was also to kind of help us with take some load off the other chillers. And also we redid the pan system on the water tower up here as well. Cooling tower. And we changed the piping system because it was set up so like if part of it went out, like all went out.
Yep.
So we had a situation where a risk that if we had like a partial failure, we were like totally out of commission, which means we'd have to kick up both of the big chillers at the same time in order to cool during the day. And if we ever had to turn those on during the day, and our peak would go up during the day, then Duke will charge us. It could cost us $150,000 for going over our peak load capacity with Duke for just hitting it like one day. That could cost us $150,000. So we wanted to do some things to safeguard against that, and so that was a remedy. It wasn't really designed right to begin with, and we made that fix. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you did good. You did good. This way.
Trees, things of that nature. So this is so exhibits. This could be a combination of like making things that go in exhibits right now, or it could be things that we're repairing to go back out. We've also about the last 4 or 5 years we've done contract work. So we've done like trains, Entertainment Junction in Westchester. We've done work for them. We've done work for Butler County Soil Conservation. We did a training basically it's a trailer that you open it up on one side and do education things on that. So we've done quite a bit of contract work like that. Kind of told the group they're all managed on a profit center basis. So we see the revenues are, what the expenses are. They're all expected to kind of make all that make sense and carry the bottom line. So they're pretty talented group, kind of entrepreneurial. So
Head this way. They just don't know how to clean up.
We put them on a huge forklift, drove them in, set them place, took them right out on the side. And we can usually do it about 30% cheaper. Most museums enjoy the process.
Room, it gets used for storage as well. And this is another area. One of the things that we always seem to be challenged with is storage room, whether it's for exhibit pieces or whether it's for crates for exhibits that we currently have. The dinosaurs that you saw him taking down and that purple case you saw him taking over there came from this room, and it's something that we have to put in our space during the run of the exhibit so that we can then ultimately use it to package everything back up. So there's about 9 main air handlers. The one that we just looked at is one of them. You may or may not have been told, I didn't hear what you were saying, Doug, sorry, the noise was too much. But that's a high pressure duct system, so we're pumping air through large, thick sheet metal ducts that are running far lengths to get to the farthest parts of the building. We did that because they strategically placed those air handlers on the back portions of the building. They run great, they've been taking good care of the space, but they aren't really practical to put in other locations, and they're reaching the end of their useful life. This space is what we call the old fiberglass area, and as we walk through it, you're really just going to see that there's a lot of crate storage that they use for different exhibits that they've got. Ones that are either in-house right now or ones that are traveling. Obviously, they didn't know we were heading this direction. Storage. This is an area of the building that has never been developed. You'll notice because of the concrete, there is no concrete floors, it's all dirt. We're actually on this wall that you're seeing right here is just adjacent to the Dalton Street tunnel. So Dalton Street's running east and west, or north and south, I'm sorry, right on the other side of this wall. We use this space right now for housing a lot of pieces that are coming out of parts of the building. As we find historical pieces of the building, we try to collect them down in the far end of this area and keep them kind of together so we know what fabric we might still have that can be reused in the building. As you're walking through here, we're going to go all the way to the other side. Just be careful when you walk through these planks that are on the ground, just so you don't trip on something. It's not very even flooring, it's very uneven.
I would point out that people say, what did they spend the money for in 1990? This is what the spaces looked like in 1990. So where all these exhibits are, it was dirt floors. And so that's why it took a lot of, so the money was spent is to make it so you could actually put exhibits in there. And then of course the exhibits themselves were paid for out of the money in 1990 as well.
Not getting to you, is it? Yeah. Yep. It makes you start looking forward to spring every year, is what it does to you in winter. That's right. That's right. For the most part, yeah. Especially what we have on these racks down here. As we've started, as we did Project 1, there were pieces and parts that came out of that we wanted to kind of collect so that we don't just, you don't throw away certain pieces of fabric of the building, whether it's historic or not, or if it's even carpet or stuff that's left over from a project, we can reuse it. But all these frames right here, aluminum and door handles, it was all part of the original building, so we didn't want to throw them away.
Decide that we can reincorporate these or use them for repair parts or whatever. We tried to keep those all and just have them available for the future.
That would go to Paleo Lab. I can get you out if you need to. You can start going that way if you want. And I'll take him this way. Excuse me. Yeah. You might want to just, before you...
This is, in terms of value of the street, this is the only north-south street in Queensgate. And so this is a key critical commercial transit part to all of Queensgate. You've got the railroad over here, and you've got I-75 over here, and so this is it. And one of the challenges we've had is, as the structural issues have kind of happened at the top, it's actually had an impact on the street. It's had an impact on this, on the, sort of a tunnel if you're down here, but on top it's actually a bridge system. And so the city sends us, warning notices and says, so we signed this lease that they signed in 1990. They say, you're responsible for it. It's like, kind of, yeah, right. Because the cost of that is like, yeah, right. So they sent us notice that you need to fix your bridge, because technically we're responsible for it. We're like, okay, so there are real issues. This is about a $20 million project to rebuild this structure, get this all cleaned back up, and take care of it for the future. That's not in our financial capacity to just take that on to satisfy the city of that. It's actually structurally okay. There's things that keep happening, and eventually it's going to have to be dealt with. But it is a critical. I mean, you look at when you're walking down there, you'll understand. There's no doing without this street. Watch your shoes here.
Yeah. Gee. We didn't meet.
We're going underneath. The fountain is right above us here. Matter of fact, these pipes that you see right there are going up to the bottom pool of our fountain.
Are you coming back?
The fountain is kind of like centered there over those pipes that you see right there.
The fountain's actually a leaking system went through, and there's other leaking in the
Doug
system.
showing us the water.
So that's part of the system that has to be fixed out. Plus you've got the water.
Down to a problem where they say, or we find that physically something's wrong, that weight is becoming a problem, we'd have to shut the fountain down. We've had the luxury, even though it's been a nuisance, we've had the luxury of keeping the fountain too long. We just have to keep it, and it'll drip down to the road. Underneath the fountain, right? The nozzles and the parts of the fountain where the water comes out, the jets. This is a tank, which is where all the water will flow back to. It's kind of a gravity fed back to this tank, and then as it gets into this tank, it'll be piped back out through the network of piping and pumps to each of the various nozzles on the end of it. And this is all pretty much original piping. I think this tank might be original. We've got some problems with the bottom I-beams that are supporting the weight of this. This is like a 20,000 gallon tank of water. But the fountain itself and the structure up above is where the biggest problem resides. There is issues down here with some of this equipment, just that it could be replaced because it's reaching the end of its useful life.
What's the problem with the fountain? What's the problem with the fountain itself?
There's a lead pan underneath it, and there was some leaking in 1990, and they decided to try and fix it. And so they took the line, threw it all up, and started taking it apart. And they started going down through it to try and fix it. They discovered when they were into it, they were, oops, let's put it all back together and walk away. So, I mean, they could never afford to deal with it. So they penetrated that lead pan and created more places coming through. And there is just kind of around that whole area. There's some breaking, there's just some leaking. There's also there's the ceiling, the expansion joint systems, which need to be redone. And they need to be redone periodically. It's not like it's a failure or something. Just periodically, those things will have to be redone.
I'll walk through this way. Their workshop up here, you can see a lot of the trains that are out. to be serviced or worked on. The guys that came up here from down at Duke Energy have been really a great addition in the winter months when they come in for the holidays, and what they've brought to the excitement of trains. And they work on them back here, but the exhibit itself is right outside these doors, which I'm going to take you to now.
So Duke Energy used to spend a lot of money by putting it up and taking it down every year. The reason it made
Now the good thing about having it here at our facility is we don't have to take it down every year like they did downtown.
Put it on together, take it down every year.
We've got enough space that we're able to kind of keep it up year round. We don't share it with everybody year round, otherwise it might lose its novelty during the holidays. But now you're kind of seeing, after everything's kind of shut down, they start bringing some of the Christmas decorations into this room, and this room will be kind of where they'll store some of that stuff until next season. But here's the train. I'll walk over this way, Francie.
How long has the train been in here?
2 years.
Just 2 years?
Just 2 years, yeah.
Because I remember walking through when we were building it.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, we just closed the door. So we need to add Lego Music Hall to this.
Yeah, there you go. That'd be a good idea. Lego Music Hall. There's a Lego Union Terminal too. It was what? Oh yeah, yeah. This is part of what Boo Fest was in, and there was a kind of like a pathway of concrete to get through it, but most of it was dirt. See where I took advantage of his finger and put one of my arrows. He's a real live guy. That little guy there that's pointing, Jack, he came from CG&E, Duke Energy, whatever. He's been with the train for a lot of years. He's retired from there, but he comes up here and he's about that tall. So,
That's life size.
that's life size.
We're going this way?
Yes, we're heading out that way.
Okay, so we're going to come on over this way.
I don't get into trains enough to know.
We need to answer. And Scott will note those down, so we'll be prepared to work with the design team and our evaluation team to make sure we get those questions answered. So I'd just like to open the floor. I asked Liza if I can impose upon her to get us started. It always takes one brave soul to get us started. She's a very brave soul. Uh-oh, looks like the microphone is not. Thank you, Liza.
Thank you. I was just talking with Keith here and sharing the fact that it was quite a feat just to take on a tour that was as expansive as this was, but it was really important, I think, for all of us to see just how massive of a building this is, how beautiful it is, but to understand how it really does operate and run. I was also, as I was on the tour, commenting to some folks that my husband and I live in a home that's over 100 years old, so it's older than this building. But how many commonalities there are in some of the issues that happen, whether you're in this massive of a space or something a little bit smaller. And I do believe that there is clearly quite a lot of work to be done. A question I have, and I think will be answered later today, is what was the cost of the first phase, Project 1? Because when you see what amount of work was done, but how small of an area that was, and to think about this project and what the cost would be, it's going to be very interesting.
So it was right at 10 million, but it included some of the air handling systems and the things we had to fix in the backside too, so it wasn't just exclusively one section here.
Okay.
Great question.
About 7%. I know it's 7% of the flat roof system. So it was like 7,600 square feet on flat roof. We got 100,000 square feet of flat roofs, so it gives you some sense of building scale.
That Project 1 will be important to the construction management firms as they cost out what a project 2 would cost, because we learned a lot from that. Thank you, Liz.
I just have one comment, Bob, because every time I take this tour, I see something different, and I think the average citizen knows so little about both the asset and liability factors of this project, and the assets certainly outnumber the liabilities. It just makes me wonder if we can do a better job telling our story.
That's a great point, and certainly communication is going to be an important part of this, whatever we decide to do. John?
One of my concerns, this is the second time I've taken a tour as well, and it's an impressive place. One of my concerns for us as the task force is to get our arms around the scope of work that has to be done here, and how we can clearly define the scope and budget the scope when it feels like it's a domino effect of we do one thing, there are multiple other things that need to be done. It can be very difficult to define a finish point.
Yes. Great point. We talked about that with the design team yesterday, about having different buckets of scope that that could be separated, could be finite. I'm sorry, Mariam?
No, I guess I didn't see anything that surprised me. I mean, you know, I've seen it all. There are solutions to everything. There is a cost, and I think John's comment about scope sort of is where I was going to go. It's like, what's more important for this group? And I'm going on to this a little late, but having not seen some of the other work that's been done. But what's more important, the program, which turns into scope, or the decision on preserving the building? Right. And to me, that you can't answer the second question without answering the first question: is what is the program and what is the scope? So,
great question. Great question.
I guess a thought I had is sort of a follow-on to Tim's comment, that one, you've assembled a very impressive team of consultants and business leaders, and unfortunately not all the people who will be the ultimate voters can take the tour that we just took. It seems to me that it's very critical to have the proper PR, and how you do that and when those people get engaged and who those people might be. Right. Because I think the average person out there has no idea.
Right.
My thought.
It's a great point.
He spoke about, because of the size of this building, the exhibits that were able to be brought here that not other facilities could do. And again, to Tim's point, I think that's something that we don't think about. We take for granted that it's, so that would be a piece to the PR of that.
That's a great point. We asked the Museum Center as part of our work that as we get the different discrete elements of what would need to be done, how does that change the experience for those people who come to the facility? So we're not only looking at what the cost might be, but we're also looking at what the positive change in experience might be, which would obviously enable a different public relations campaign. Mabe Rodriguez, who's with us, is on loan from the Procter & Gamble company, working for Doug in the Museum Center, and that's one of the things she's going to be working on. There's obviously a strong consumer aspect of this. Other thoughts, comments, questions? We obviously have also asked the question of what would it cost to have a greenfield site? What would it cost to move into different buildings, into different museums, so that we have all of those numbers at the same time and make those comparisons? Bill? I'm sorry.
Wait. Bob, I just think, to me, it breaks down into some relatively simple decisions that need to be made on a very complex problem. But do you save an iconic building? And then secondly, if you decide, yes, we do save it, then how you save it.
Right.
But you have an envelope problem, you have a mechanical electrical systems problem, and then you have finish issues connected with museums. And those things can be done halfway, they can be done 3/4 of the way, or they can be done right. And I think because it's a public facility, if we're going out to the public and ask for their support, I think the public is tired of hearing comments about, give me $50 million and we'll see what we can do, and then coming back 3 or 5 years later and saying, I need another $50 million because I didn't get the job. So I think there's a right way to do it, and if our recommendation is to move ahead, then it would certainly be my feelings that there's a way to do this, it's the right way that will preserve it for the next 100 years with maintenance, but and that really is the only good answer, long-term answer in my opinion.
Right. Thank you, Rick. Other thoughts? Any questions that are in your mind that you want to make sure we get addressed? They don't need to all come up right now, but if you do develop any questions, just let us know and we'll make sure we log them down and make sure we get answers to them. Okay, well, please enjoy your lunch and we'll get started as soon as lunch is over.